Hi, Deborah. We are going to be going live in about 20 seconds
Okay,
on
sounds
Zoom.
good.
Yeah, I'm going to start the webinar and it will start recording. The audio is good, the video is good, slides are good.
Okay,
Uh,
great.
Thank you. If you could just share this on an email at the end of the session. Right.
Okay, sure. Or okay.
Or if,
I might be on Slack. I'll check. But if I
okay,
can't, I'll.
great. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Thank you.
Thanks. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name's Deborah Sol. It's a pleasure to be with you today. It looks like people are still joining our session, and I understand that a number of you may be on YouTube. And so I have no idea about the numbers, who's there. So I'm going to try and do some interactive stuff a little bit later that we can try and get a sense of who's here with all of us together today. So hello, welcome. This is obviously a course on digital transformation. You've been learning about digital transformation in terms of the platform business models that have become possible with widespread and connected digital technology. In this session, I would like to talk about digital transformation in somewhat of a different way. My message to you today is that digital transformation is essentially about transforming the organization, right? And what that requires at a deeper level is cultural transformation. So I'm going to share some findings, some research findings about the dimensions of culture that really fit the digital era, and give you a framework to perhaps help you map the culture of your own organization. So that's where we're going. And thank you to people who are chatting in through the chat. If you're able to, if you're on Zoom, please feel free to chat. I will, of course, take questions through the Q&A, and you'll see here on my screen that, or on my slides, that I'm inviting you to join this poll environment. If you're actually at a desktop or at a laptop where you can open up another browser tab, you can go to this address, pollev.com, and / Deborah Sol 517. If you're actually on a mobile phone, or if you have a mobile handy, you can download this app pretty quickly and then join this channel. And I realized that probably one of the things that I should do for everybody before I get going is put this information into the chat window, because that will also help people. So let me do that quickly. All right, so the information is also in the chat now. Is that right? There we go. Okay, so before we go too much further, I'd like to perhaps introduce myself a little bit better. So as I mentioned, my name's Deborah Sol. I am a technology and organizational researcher and an instructor and a consultant. For 20 years or so, I've experienced and studied how organizations and groups design, manage, and use digital technology, and specifically how they do that effectively. How do they work effectively in increasingly digital settings? I started off in the technical world before moving into the business world, and have a decent amount of experience leading research and development projects, both in industry and subsequently in academia. I've also had a lot of years of client-facing responsibility as a subject matter expert on sort of organizational, technical issues, especially, you know, organizations that at the nexus of those two sort of areas. I'm hoping that some of the South African members of our audience recognize my accent. I am South African and half British as well. But I've worked around the world. I've had the pleasure and joy to be able to, you know, live in Europe and America for a number of years from my work. And that's one of the reasons I love coming back to work with the Emeritus programs and courses, because I feel that there's an incredible richness of being able to interact with a global community. And I hope that you are all taking advantage of that possibility to interact and create relationships that could serve you very well in the future for learning, for collaboration, maybe just getting to understand our world better. So before we go on, let's hear about you. So hopefully everybody's been able to get into the poll environment. As I said, it's on the address is on chat, but I'm going to put it up again. Whoops, sorry, back one. There we go. So this is our poll. If you can link to pollev.com/Deborah Sol 517 or work with the poll chat, and you'll be asked a question: where are you today? And I encourage you to try and join our community, and we'll start to see where everybody is. People who are on YouTube should be able to do this as well. Uh-oh, sorry, I think there's a problem. Let me fix that. More people coming in. No, they're not coming in. There we go. Sorry. Now you should be able to respond. Indonesia. Joe. Oh, we have a number of people from Indonesia for now, right? Okay. Yes, Galim. Thank you, Abhilash. So yes, put your current location. Where are you? Kazakhstan. Wow. Vietnam. India. UAE. Zurich. So we got some people from Europe. Dubai. Brazil. What is FRM? Maybe somebody could elaborate on that. We'll give people a few more times. So I see Africa, South Africa. It's sort of split there. So it looks, at this point, it looks like we have a large contingent from Indonesia. So welcome. That's great. I see another person coming in from Chile. And hopefully you are also all seeing this on your screens. I'll give it a few more minutes, and then we'll move on. All right, so now we start to see all the South Africans signing in there, right? Okay. Well, this will stay open for a few more minutes, and if you get a chance to put your venue, that'd be great, because I will save this and it will be included when we share the slides with you afterwards. So great. Kazakhstan, India, Switzerland, Zurich, Switzerland. Renil, not sure about that. My geography is not perfect, I admit. Anyway, welcome to everybody from wherever you are. So let's think about digital transformation. Companies around the world are collectively investing hundreds of millions on digital transformation initiatives and efforts, right? And their concerns are often the same. They're thinking about managing switches from legacy systems, thinking about, how do we deal with siloed data, getting buy-in from their board, trying to satisfy current customers, worrying about time to value. How do you make this, get through this transition without disrupting your current customers? And often the organizational impact is much less top of mind. They're not thinking about the organization. They're not thinking about the employees, the managers, the people actively involved and responsible for fulfilling these new digital strategies, right? And so we're going to try and think about who or what is being transformed and in what ways. Obviously the technology is central to digital transformation, but we need to account for the human impact too. Otherwise, those investments in tools and processes won't deliver the returns that we want or expect, right? So we think about, I'm encouraging you to think about effective digital transformation as involving the transformation of the organization. Think about becoming a digital organization. And in this session, I'll offer some guidance about how to start that journey. Okay. So before we go on, let's try and see whether we can get some sense from you about how digital or traditional your organization is. And I'm going to check this one. For some reason, all of my polls seem to be locked. So that's a bit of a challenge, but there we go. Now it's open. So I encourage you to let us know, where do you stand? So we have a lot of quickly people coming in with their thoughts, and you'll see the percentages adjust as more people add to one or another option. We'll give you a little bit more time. Somebody said their company is digital. That's good. All right, so things are starting to settle down. So let's have a look. Oh, somebody, wow, the traditional people changed their minds, right? There's no real definition here on the table yet, right? I haven't sort of said to you, this is what a traditional organization is. This is what a digital organization is. And so you're essentially going with your intuition, right? About what do I mean when I talk about traditional or digital? It's obviously got something to do with how much effort you're putting into so far about, becoming digital, how much technology or digital technology you're using in your business, in what ways, perhaps, how much you're exploring with digital tools or changing the way you get work done using some of those digital technologies or digital data. Clearly, we've got a little bit of a dispersion, which is great, because we're going to try and understand, what's behind those labels, because, as I said, we haven't got any definitions yet. Hopefully, everybody's had a chance to jump in there. It will remain open for a little bit, but let me put some ideas on the table for now. What does it mean to be a digital organization? Are you thinking of primarily sort of tech companies, born digital companies that, completely depend on the internet to enable their business? Is it, how much IT processing power that you need to run on, right? I mean, here are some names that people might say, oh yeah, they're digital. Well, maybe, but I want to try and give you some alternative examples. Let's talk a little bit about Schindler. Schindler is over 140 years old. It's and now my friend from Zurich may be very familiar with this company, I'm sure. It's a Swiss company, but they're in the business of building people moving equipment. escalators, elevators, rolling walkways, that sort of things. But they are leveraging digital capabilities intensively, extensively in a very physical business of move. They say they move 1 billion people every day, making these massive mobility equipments and solution, right? And so they are using digital technology to place sensors on all of their equipment in situ, so in the context of where it's being used in their customers' locations, and being able to monitor that remotely, being able to support their technicians on site when they are doing usually preventative maintenance, because they have digitized data about their equipment running and can start to make predictions about what sort of interventions are needed before an elevator, stops working, for example. They've actually partnered in recent years with Microsoft to build a platform actually that is called Building Minds, which is intended to seamlessly integrate, building owners and managers with their building assets and with all the partners and providers who help keep a facility operating, right? And the idea is to sort of create much more streamlined, more productive interactions between owners and often, these are commercial buildings, commercial installations. So there's tenants, there's building owners, there's facilities managers, lots of different service providers. And so there is, by being able to have all of that digital data and digital capability to monitor aspects of how the facility, the building, the physical environment is working, they can provide a lot more value along with all of their partners. So that's one, perhaps what you might have thought of as a traditional company behaving in a very digitally enabled manner, right? Here's another example. Sorry, I mentioned that. BBVA. This is also a very old company in a very inherently conservative business or industry of banking, right? They've sort of put a lot of effort some years back, nearly, I'd say over a decade now, to try and, move much more towards digital banking solutions. And one of the ways that they went after that was to say, we have to change internally as an organization. We have to become much more collaborative ourselves so that we can understand how to be collaborative, how to be empathetic with our customers, to understand their needs much better and to be able to meet, sort of recognize and meet those needs more effectively. Their former CEO and exec chairman, Francisco Gonzalez, has been, sort of had been pushing on this goal for, I'd say 20 years now, right? And really, when you think about their transformation, they led with changing mindsets and changing internal processes and really trying to build a culture that was receptive to more rapid change. Prior to that, that conservative banking environment had been very, very, very slow to change, much more, comfortable with the status quo. And he really pushed from the inside, from the cultural side, to change how the organization thought about, what it was capable of in order to deliver completely new services to their customers around the world too, right? It's also it's a global company. Another company, very different business, Domino's. Perhaps you've tweeted for a pizza. Domino's is sort of about 60 years old. So none of these companies are they all sort of predate the internet. They predate digital, sort of the ubiquitous digital data and connectedness that we just take for granted right now. But it's also global. It's active in more than 70 countries. But it's really known now, not for its very bad pizza. It had that reputation some while back, but now it's known for innovating online and for really using digital to get to kind of create engagement and an experience for its customers that keeps them coming back, right? And so, just to sort of sum up, my point is that digital organizations can emerge from any industry. And increasingly, companies in all industries have to think about, they have to transform themselves in order to remain effective and successful in this digital future. But where do you start, right? Our research, and this is research that I've conducted with my colleague, George Westerman at MIT, our research points to culture as a key component. So I will talk about that right now. When we started studying, George and I, we started studying what it means to become digital. We were both at MIT working on, digital transformation research. And George particularly was heavily involved with the Sloan CIO Leadership Awards. And we would, we were able to learn from a lot of the people who kind of were moving in that circle. But I want to give you some of the language that we heard, we sort of picked up from that period. This is Carlos Bozzoli, who was then head of global ICT at Enel, an energy company, mostly in Europe. And, he talks about, says digitalization is not an ambition, it's a necessity, which is what I mentioned a moment ago, necessity for every company. But he goes on, we are deeply convinced it's not only a matter of technology, but a widespread digital culture is needed to be fostered all over the company, right? So talking about changing the organization, the people, this is what is necessary. Here's Dave Gledhill, the CIO of DBS, which actually won the CIO Leadership Award that year. He comments, we at DBS have also recognized the importance of building a strong innovation-led mindset. So we're thinking, we're getting to how people think about things. They're to reimagine banking, right? So again, banking, innovation, not necessarily intuitive some while back, right? And then he comments, in fact, one of the core facets of our journey has been how each and every person at DBS has been involved in driving and adopting these transformational changes. So it's not, digital transformation is not just something that happens with the technology and it's maybe changing some business processes and putting different tools in place. You're actually having to work through all the people in your organization as well. So, to reiterate for anybody who may have joined late, my message to you today is that digital transformation is essentially about organizational transformation, and that involves cultural transformation. So I want to help you map a path to transform your own organization's cultures, if that's what's needed, right? First, I'll give you a framework to think about organizational culture. Second, I'll share some research about the dimensions of culture that fit the digital era. Then I'll show you some findings on how high-performing traditional companies compare to high-performing digital companies in terms of their cultures, right? And then finally, I'll offer some insights about leading cultural change. So that's where we're going over the next sort of half hour or slightly longer maybe. But I'll try to address questions at the end. I see one has come in already, but I'll rather save that for the end. But I encourage you to sort of note them as they come up. That'll probably be helpful. So let's think about what is an organizational culture. What does that mean? So here's a sort of brief definition. We can think about organizational culture as a system of shared assumptions, attitudes, values, and beliefs, right? So those labels should make you think, okay, it's what's going on in people's heads, right? That system that shapes how people think and act in organizations. So it's kind of, it's thoughts, values, beliefs that shape behavior. And it's a system, right? It's not sort of random or independent across people. This is a system within the organization. So we want to, it emphasizes the values of a company and the practices or behaviors that emerge as a result of those values, right? And sometimes values are based on assumptions that are so ingrained that employees simply act on them without really questioning the validity of their behavior in a given situation. So often those assumptions are sort of the deepest and least observable part of a company's or an organization's culture. And they may not be apparent even to, especially sometimes to organizational veterans. Why do we do things the way we do? Often people, don't remember what were the values, what were the assumptions behind the values that led to those behaviors. So I want to do another little exercise. I'm going to give you some examples about some values that we often talk about as companies, organizations, even though assumptions are hard to uncover. We are all familiar with the ways that companies describe themselves using value labels, right? Such as what you see here. They might be noted in published documents like the annual report. They might come up frequently in verbal statements by leaders, or they might be posted on websites. Some companies even have, explicitly on their website, these are our values, right? Noted organizational scholar Ed Schein called these espoused values. These are the values that we espouse, that we say we value, right? So I'd like to do an exercise with you. I'm going to ask all the people who replied B, or maybe you thought you might have been an A, for our traditional, if you categorized your company as early or traditional transitioning organization, give us some of the labels that your company says it values. Share some of those. Just this poll should be live. There we go. And so this is only for the people who said they were traditional or early transitioning. So we have respect. Thank you. Great to get us going. Let's give them a little chance to get their values out. It's really a very interesting exercise to see what values emerge from that people can talk about. Perseverance, more respect, customer centric. Okay. I will say, if you see your entry not popping up exactly as you want it, you can edit it. So integrity. Teamwork. Yes. You may put in more than 1, 2 or 3, but it would be great. Let me just quickly check the chat while that's going on. All right, so we're starting to see respect and integrity emerge as, perhaps common values in this area. Social concern, maybe that was social concern. We see a reference to innovation, teamwork, striving, excellence. Okay, growth. All right. We'll give it a couple more moments. Respect and integrity, customer centric, I think, collaboration, fairness, growth and objectivity, inclusion. Okay, great. All right. Well, we seem to have some sort of stability there. So we see that we've got a number of different values that people are relatively easily able to say, yes, this is what my company values, right? And we see respect and integrity pretty sort of high profile in that community. I'd like to do this again with the rest of you who might have said you were later transitioning or digital. So let me switch to that poll now. Oops, I went by. Okay. There we are. This is later digital companies who said yes, we're a digital organization. People who said you're a digital organization, or later in your transition. Please share your company's values. What do they talk about, right? Sustainability, empowerment. Okay. Innovation again, integrity again. Client-centric. Okay, so that's sort of similar to customer-centric again. Courage. Oh, new one. Agility. You know, you're welcome to, if you see a word that somebody else has said, but you say, yeah, that's what our company talks about too, that's fine. You know, that's the whole idea, to try and see what are the common values. Innovation and agility suddenly jump out, right? Okay. Any more? Any more? We seem to have a relatively limited interaction on this call compared to some, but perhaps it's related to the environment from which you're dialing in. I don't know. Courage, agility, and innovation are emerging as sort of key values. Agility jumping out there, right? Innovation, courage, client-centric. Okay. So this is interesting. Hopefully people can sort of, even though we've not got a lot of activity, we do start to see that, you know, among our traditional and sort of early transitioning organizations, people who sort of self-identify that way have a set of values that on the face of it are different from the set of values that our later transitioning or, you know, completely digital companies say their value, right? Here we have agility as a very prominent value, along with innovation and courage. And it would be great to exactly hear from people, you know, how does that value translate into behavior? It would be really cool to explore. I see adaptive there, speed, again, and a label that never, or at least a value that never came up before, right? I think this is employee, maybe that might have, I'm not sure what that employee relates to. It might be linked to something. Platforms, okay. So this is just sort of face validity to say that there are differences in the sets of values that companies hold. And perhaps we can start to tease out a little bit more, you know, what are values that are well adapted to the digital era versus that might have perhaps been well adapted to the past, but perhaps are not as important or not as critical anymore, right? They don't enable, or they don't support, they don't encourage the most best fitted practices necessary today. So thank you, everybody. You can still keep adding to this poll if you want to. I see agility still hanging in there as a key value. So let's move on. Here's a framework. Whoops, I keep going past my tabs. I apologize for that. Here's a way to think about characterizing culture. It's really, really hard to get at the underlying assumptions. And so we typically study culture indirectly through multiple angles. So this framework helps you think about different aspects of culture. Values refer to those underlying organizational values that guide and shape an organization's behaviors and responses, right? We can ask people what they value, and it may not, you know, often it's accurate, but sometimes it's not, you know, exactly complete. It may not be you know, exactly the full scope of values, and we certainly struggle to get at the assumptions that underlie those values, right? What can help is to also ask about the practices or their values in practice. And by this, we mean norms of behavior. How do people typically act or interact in particular situations, right? Behaviors are more visible than values, right? And then we can also think about the artifacts, which are aspects of an organization that are much more visible, and sometimes they're even tangible. Some of the things, some aspects, artifactual aspects of culture might be the building layout, right? Whether it's open plan or whether, a lot of closed door offices, for example. Other things that might be convey something of the culture of a company might be the dress code, the colors, the style of the furniture, that sort of thing. So we're going to dig into these elements. Okay. So when we think about looking for evidence of organizational culture, we're looking for, perhaps sometimes we start with the artifacts. We can sort of see shared values and assumptions, perhaps in how people in the enterprise dress or act or perform their work, right? And interact with each other in the outside world. You can look at this, this group of pictures and imagine that the culture in those organizations might be quite different from the culture in these organizations, right? Just from the dress code, just from the look of the offices, right? One thing about culture is that in a company's early years, the founder or founders can have a very, very strong influence on the formation of culture. They explicitly articulate and embody certain values and attitudes. And as a company grows, as an organization grows, those values sort of become solidified into, sort of, they become taken for granted, right? Become unspoken attitudes, unwritten rules, routine behaviors, right? People learn what worked, at some point in time, and the values that drive that just become sort of built into routine practices, right? That people learn responses that worked well over time. That's why culture generally is very, very supportive of strategy, because those assumptions and values are adaptive in a particular environment, and they help an organization work well, work effectively, work quickly, respond quickly to sort of typical situations that come up in that environment. The trouble comes is when the environment changes, assumptions can't be taken for granted anymore. You can't assume that behaviors that worked well in the past are effective now in this new environment. Those values may become outdated. Capabilities can become rigidities, right? And so a culture that might have underpinned strategy now might actually undermine strategy, right? So this is why we need to sort of recognize the role of culture in helping an organization transform for a digital future. So, we talk about the label, we use the label digital native to describe an individual who's perhaps grown up in a world of ubiquitous computing and connectivity. Like my kids, maybe you are young enough to be a digital native. But, that because of that sort of growing up in that environment, they demonstrate a very natural and instinctive facility with digital resources, right? And so what we want to think about is, is there a comparison in the organizational world? And so just as individual digital natives are culturally conditioned to navigate the digital world very fluidly, so are digitally native companies culturally conditioned to benefit from the opportunities arising in the digital economy, right? And so we're going to look at the cultures of these digitally native companies to try and say what is common among across their cultures that would suggest that that's what's needed to survive and thrive, to grow in this in this digital environment, right? So we studied and interviewed representatives from a number of different digital organizations, including Wayfair, Amazon, Wayfair, HubSpot, Netflix, Care.com, Redfin, GE Digital, not doing so well these days, unfortunately. But as well as looking at some of those companies that I mentioned earlier, that, that were really quite far along in their digital transition. And the questions were, what are the key features of culture in these kinds of maybe born digital firms? Can we characterize a digital culture? What features of their cultures, what dimensions are different from more traditional firms, right? Is it a process of maturation? Can you change a company's culture, and if so, how? Right. So this is what we were aiming for first, is just to identify the dimensions of digital culture, what we might think about as digital culture. So it's common to think about cultures, especially in the world of renowned digital firms, in terms of the very visible artifacts like the buildings and the offices and facilities and the dress code and stuff, recognizable logos. What typically catches our attention or media's attention, right? Fancy office complex, the bright, colorful open workspaces, the dress, the jeans and hoodie outfit, the casual, the nice food in the canteen, free food in the canteen, right? That sort of thing. But I want to emphasize that these visible organizational features certainly make life more pleasant and comfortable for employees, but they're not the source of new ways of working or higher levels of performance. They're not the source. What's more important are the underlying organizational values that are manifest through these more visible markers, right? Values are what lie at the heart, are the source of distinct practices that in turn influence performance in the digital world. And our study of successful digital firms revealed that cultures that are really support organizational performance in a data-intensive, highly connected, and fast-changing environment. So 3 things: data-intensive, highly connected, and fast-changing environment, right? Culture supports organizational performance in that environment. So let me talk about some of the key values that emerge. One of the first is impact. Valuing impact means having big aspirations to change the world by reaching and responding to millions of different customers. It's reflected in these 2 complementary values of customer intimacy or responsiveness and immense scalability. So really valuing scalable design, building with the intent that we're going to go big, we're going to go huge quickly, right? But at the same, so you're sort of trading off that global scale with very, very local responsiveness. If you think about, say, Amazon and Netflix, how they built a core that is scalable, can serve millions and millions of customers very, very efficiently, but they use data and even customer generated in data, right? Feedback, for example, on products or on movies. They use that data to tailor each customer's experience so that everybody gets a feeling of, that they're being responsive to my needs, but they're able to do this for, this immense audience. And we see this very prominently, this kind of approach, in well-designed digital platform businesses. So this speaks directly to your current focus, right? The core functionality is focused, is standardized and easily scaled, and then you have the peripheral features that are added on, offered by producer partners and that sort of thing. So this is one of the key values that we saw emerging from our survey, our interviews with digital firms, high performing digital firms, is this complete focus value for, having this incredible impact on the world. The next value that just, emerged very, very prominently was speed, right? And we saw this a little bit in the word cloud from our digital group earlier, a little bit, associated with agility too. Value for speed means valuing an action orientation, preferring to move fast and iterate rather than sort of waiting to have all the data, waiting to have all the answers before you act, right? And we see it reflected in two kind of related value choices, that they want to go for speed over perfection, right? We're not going to wait, we're not going to wait to get it all right. But we're also not going to just say, put something out there and stop. It's improvement over success, right? We're going to iterate to improve. This is how we behave. The DBS chief executive, I mentioned DBS earlier because their CIO, Dave Gledhill, won the leadership award back in 2017. The CEO, Piyush Gupta, and this is a DBS banking environment, he talked about particular data point that he likes to cite in the context of showing how their values shifted, how DBS's values shifted. And that was what he called release cadence. It was the cycle or the speed and frequency with which the bank would put new applications into the market. They were able to increase that release cadence 8.5 times, right? So much more, moving much faster in how they would work on and deliver new products, new services, new solutions to their customers. And he admitted that inevitably it meant you're putting out imperfect products, but they were thinking about themselves much more, not so much, as a typical bank, but as a tech company that's in the, part of the practice, part of the learning is that you put your products out in beta version and see how people respond, learn from their experiences, and quickly improve, quickly iterate to, create a better version. And so that was how they started thinking about, what was a better way to operate with this value for speed and this practice of acting fast and then iterating to improve. I don't know whether people have thought about this, but what do you think? Why do you think success is not valued so much as improvement? Any thoughts on that? You might chat in. I'll let people have a moment to think about that. Why improvement over success? It's worth recognizing that, in a very changeable, fast-moving environment, the definition of success is also always changing, right? Yeah, CB's commented, it's part of trial and error. Fail fast to get to success quicker. Yes, so, but it's very hard to define success for the long term. So even if you think, I'm going to work on this and target what's success now, as things move on, as the environment shifts again, you have to, you can't rest on your laurels. And so this idea of focusing on getting things out there, moving fast, and then, valuing it, the improvement cycle rather than the achievement of success is a much more effective set of values and practices to start building around, right? Let me talk about the third value that emerged. That was, I'm sorry, I'm working. So, okay, I apologize. please go through. I'll try and change this. Sorry, folks. Let me just change something here. There we go. We'll put that like that in case we get more interruptions. So let me talk about openness, because this value is kind of an interesting one. Basically, people talked about valuing open and broad engagement with very diverse sources of information in sometimes seemingly opposite but also complementary choices, right? Thinking about data over to intuition, and talent over titles. So learning from people and machines in the sense of, data from the machines, intuition. You want to try and get more sort of grounded data versus ad hoc intuition, right? That's the one thing. But in situations where you don't have prior experience, you don't have the data to reference, go for the talent wherever you find it. Go for the expertise wherever you find it, independent of title, right? So when those circumstances are novel, really turning to human expertise wherever it can be found, even outside the organization, outside sort of traditional boundaries of function or discipline or even organization. And so we see that we're getting this sort of the system of values that enable rapid response, that we're able to move fast and we can gather information from, we're open to gathering relevant information from wherever we can get it in order to deliver on that rapid response, right? And have that large impact. The final value that's important to recognize that emerged from our interviews with these companies was this idea of autonomy, this value for autonomy, which means valuing the independent actions of individuals while holding them accountable for those actions. So it's sort of a dual thing. It links two related values, that this idea of having independent authority, but also very, very transparent accountability. And the digital nature of the company, and the digital data that sort of is central to these organizations, is what enables those individuals to have the ability to act independently, right? They can get the information they need, they can be informed, they can act effectively on that independent basis. At the same time, it is the digital data that enables visibility of results. It enables a record of actions, the digitization of work, essentially, provides that record of what's been done, that the visibility of activity. And so people can be held accountable to, well, you said you were going to do that, is it there, right? And that provides for a lot of flexibility, but not flexibility without that's sort of completely unmonitored, that you're actually getting that flexibility, but very productive, right? Very productive. And so, we essentially, when you put all of these elements together, we get a set of values evident in digitally enabled practices. They're regularly and frequently present in these high-performing digital firms. We see rapid experimentation, where they're constantly and systematically experimenting, learning from the results, and quickly applying new insights. We see self-organizing, where people are quickly collaborating and coordinating outside of formal frameworks or structures, fluidly across functional and geographic and organizational boundaries, right? And they can do that to solve novel or complex problems and get things done for their customers, right? We see them driving decisions and actions with data. They're collecting and using accurate data to make decisions versus, relying on intuition or gut feel. They're using that data to solve problems and design solutions that can then be scaled very rapidly, very economically, okay? They talk about obsessing over customers And, we see that these values of autonomy and impact are instantiated in this obsession over customers, intensively focusing on those customers and, working to quickly address both stated and unstated needs, right? And also not just thinking about the customers, the current customers, but also potential future customers, right? Having that value of impact that says, okay, what can we do? What can we be doing for our potential and actual customers, right? And then the final sort of core practice that is sort of grounded in these values is what we talk about as focusing on results. Being accountable for achieving goals and continually sort of striving for measurable results that really make a difference to customers. Not just, and it's not just a focus on metrics that can be measured, just things that can be measured. It's really focusing on things that matter to the customer. Are we measuring and monitoring our progress on those, right? So this is what we sort of think about as a system, the system of values and practices that is the culture of digital firms that are really succeeding right now. Our research shows that these values and practices reinforce each other, right? They create this unified culture that's very effective in a fast-moving, connected world. So the thing that it actually enables is that you can produce high performance in service of both innovation and execution, when you're in this fast-moving, connected digital world. So I'm looking at the time, and I want to move on a little because I do want to talk to you about how this culture compares with traditional companies, right? Is there a difference? So we have conducted a subsequent survey where we were looking at, surveying a lot of different representatives from a lot of different companies about their cultural values and practices. And in the course of this, we actually were linking back to prior organizational culture research as well. I want to just acknowledge that thinking sort of historically and with our new insights from our digital culture research, we were identifying a couple of what you might have said were more traditional practices that were mentioned in prior research, but were not mentioned by our digital companies at all in that first phase. They mention speed, they mention agility, they mention innovation, they mention openness and impact and stuff. They're not talking about saying, integrity didn't come up, rules don't come up, stability doesn't come up. But these were some of the themes that came up in prior work. So for completeness, we said, okay, our survey is going to ask about all of these things. So just to sort of put that on the table first, we'll come back to it. But let me talk about the values first. So we asked about, these four core values that had merged as prominent in our high-performing digital firms. And we were asking, respondents, how is this a value in your firm, right? And we see that if we're looking at those percent of respondents whose companies exhibit a strong presence of these digital values, right? So they've rated it pretty highly on a 7-point scale. We see that they're much more prevalent in what companies that are identified as born digital or more digital versus more traditional organizations, right? These values are definitely much more common to digital firms than in more traditional organizations. So, and this is a significant difference we see here. Okay, when it comes to practices, let me show you across that spectrum that I mentioned earlier. So these are some of the sort of key practices that emerged from the first phase of the research. And then, as I said, we asked about some other dimensions of culture that had not come up. And we see this pattern of comparison. Again, companies, the responses where they said the company had a strong presence of this practice, right? 4 or higher on a 5-point scale. And there is certainly some difference here, right, between our traditional organizations and our born digital organizations, that these practices, these digital practices of rapid experimentation, systematic experimentation, right, fluid self-organizations, this focus on using data and making decisions with data, much more prevalent practices in digital organizations than in more traditional organizations. In the middle here, customer responsiveness and results orientation, we have some interesting pattern, right? We see that there's no difference. This is not statistically different in customer responsiveness. And this is also interesting that our traditional companies saying there might seem to be more prevalent, more focused on results. That focus seems to be much more prevalent in traditional companies, and that surprised us for a while, until we sort of dug into the way people actually talked about what they meant by customer responsiveness and results orientation, right? That people think about the actual behavior behind those labels can be different in those two communities. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The other thing that was really, really interesting is that we see that we have sort of equal prevalence, let me say, of this practice of acting with integrity and stability, seeking stability, having this sort of stability orientation. Those were not markedly different between digital and traditional companies, right? They're and it's we say, well, they never mentioned this. Our earlier digital research, this never came up at all. Stability never came up at all. Integrity never came up at all. But it's not to say that it's not there, right? And so this is really, really interesting. And then finally, we see that there's quite a difference in rules orientation between more traditional firms and more digital firms. That a focus on rules is much more prevalent in traditional firms. So let me talk about how these behaviors and these values might play out to performance. So I do want to just note that this is not causality, but we do see a correlation between certain values and practices and perspectives on different kinds of performance. So, initially we sort of thinking about, well, let's just find out about values, right? And we see that, for all of those digital values, autonomy, speed, openness, and impact, they all have a strong positive relationship with overall performance, but also with these different ways of thinking about performance: innovation and revenue growth, customer satisfaction and external reputation, as well as profitability, right? So these are good values to hold, right? These are aligned with these outcomes that you're seeking. When we add the practices into the mix, it's interesting. We see that the influence, if you like, if you think this is sort of statistical regression, the influences of the values sort of fades into the background. What really counts is behavior, right? Practices. And here we start to see a little bit of differentiation, that overall rapid experimentation, rapid experimentation and this ability to self-organize and this focus on customers and results really are, strongly correlated with overall performance. When we focus just on revenue growth, what's important there? Experimentation, focusing on what your customers needs, and measuring, right? Having that results orientation, being able to know what's having a good impact. Interestingly, rules, too much rule focus, too much focus on rules, too much rules orientation is negatively associated with performance in the sense of innovation and in the sense of profitability, right? Customer satisfaction and reputation is an interesting, really, really interesting performance metric, because we see what counts there. Self-organization, this ability for your people to figure things out and get stuff done to respond to their customer, right? Obviously, results are important as well, but there's acting with integrity as a key practice that's important no matter what. If you're concerned about your customer satisfaction and your reputation, integrity is not it's not an old-fashioned value. It's a long-standing value and a long-standing cultural practice, right? It's got that, it's been valued for a long time, but it's not out of date. It shouldn't be out of date. We shouldn't think about it as being out of date. And this is really quite insightful, because a lot of perhaps more digital firms behave, in that effort to move fast and break things, right? Remember that, or kind of get things out there. Sometimes you might say, oh, they're breaking the rules, or they're not playing fair, or they're not treating their customers with respect, or they're not valuing their customers' privacy, or they're not, we have certainly seen companies that have behaved like that. And what we see from our research is that that's not sustainable. You still need to hang on to your integrity as a company if you want to survive in the digital era. So let me wrap up by talking about how you can get there. If you're leading a more traditional organization, how can you cultivate a more digital ready culture, right? I want to draw your attention to 3 principles. First, you want to think about growing the practices that set digital firms apart. So that's rapid experimentation, self-organizing, and data orientation, right? The biggest advantage that digital companies have is the speed with which they can create and test innovations, right? They're relying on the sort of digital testing and simulation, and being able to systematically test options and learn from them very, very, very rapidly. Some digital companies do thousands of tests a day, right? And all of those all of those cycles are opportunities to learn what works, what customers like, what they don't like, what they respond to or don't respond to, and change. And that's what drives impact and growth, right? Traditional companies have to try and cultivate those habits of working more rapidly, experimenting more systematically, and being ready for that self-organizing outside of, any existing sort of organizational structure, right? And admittedly, that can feel alien if you've got sort of structures and values and governance that are designed much more for cautious stability, right? But we see that these behaviors drive better performance, and you have to have the data to be able to measure that change, right? So you really need to, I'm sure you're all already collecting the data. What's important is to be analyzing it and then acting on it, right? The next sort of principle is that you want to preserve those practices of integrity and stability. We saw in the word cloud from our more traditional members on the call that integrity was, it was a key value. It's out there. People, that's how traditional companies think about themselves. And it's not bad. It's important to keep that. And, you want to, if you think about it, your customers appreciate those sorts of practices. They appreciate integrity and stability. Your investors appreciate that. Your shareholders, right? Your regulators, even. Those are important behaviors to preserve. And they're not detrimental to succeeding in the digital economy. So hang on to those, right? And actually, well, I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Well, maybe I'll say it now. You know, George and I wrote a paper for Sloan Management Review a couple of years ago, and we noted that, you know, a lot of born digital firms that might have, you know, been lacking in this area are now starting to shift. They're realizing that that's, you know, that they can't maintain their legitimacy, you know, when their customers and regulators and, you know, their stakeholders can't count on their integrity and some sort of stability. So, you know, if you've got this, preserve it, right? And then finally, you know, we recommend to refresh practices that might not be optimal anymore. You know, there's this sort of speed and connectedness of activity in the digital world needs a new orientation to customers, rules and results. First, you want to shift from sort of periodic assessment to more continual assessment, thinking, you know, you're not thinking quarterly, only looking at numbers on a quarterly basis, on a periodic basis, but having, you know, using all of that data that you're gathering to start to monitor things in more of a real-time mode, right? This is what that more real-time monitoring and assessment of results is what digital firms are really thinking about when they talk about results orientation. You want to emphasize data and measurement in those assessments rather than intuition, right? So even, you know, if you think about performance reviews for employees, you know, can you get to more data-driven assessments? Can you have more continuous assessments rather than, you know, that you know, dreaded annual performance review, right? Same with customers, you know, periodically asking customers what they want, as opposed to using your experiments to see what they actually respond to. That's a way to you know, sort of strengthen that practice of customer responsiveness, right? When digital firms talk about obsession versus just customer orientation, or, you know, they're meaning that they're trying to anticipate customer desires, proactively design new offerings and that sort of thing, right? So, and then the last thing I want to actually talk about is rules, because, you know, rules are often an excuse not to change. You know, you want to think about rules, or you want to reframe rules as a tool to help you detect important thresholds, right? So operations can change safely. So you can think about them as guardrails, right? So it's not a complete barrier, but it's a guardrail that supports very rapid, effective action within a known track, on a known path. But you can jump over those guardrails when the situation demands a new direction, right? So rules shouldn't be, you know, that this is it, absolute, but they're guardrails to help you move forward fast when you know where you're going. But when you're in a new situation, well, then that's a guardrail. It's not an absolute. And so this new way of thinking about rules can really help traditional companies. So that's what I'd like you to leave you with. Obviously, all the important leadership behaviors are crucial in this transition. You know, you need leaders who believe in these, you know, embody these values, who can walk the talk, who will, you know, provide concrete support and, you know, and call out when they see the practices that they want, you know, and call out when they see the practices that are not conducive to success in the digital era. So let me just note that I do have this article with my colleague George. We would love you to read it. It is available at the Sloan Management Review site. And that's it from me from today. I'd love to have your questions, and thank you for your time. So if you have questions and you're on Zoom, I think you can put them in through the Q&A. If you're on YouTube, I think you can pass them through the program support team, possibly. I'm not sure. Okay. And I saw there was one question that came in right at the beginning about defining a digital organization. I know I deliberately did not define that at that time because I wanted to see, how people intuitively categorize themselves or their organizations and what sort of values are prevalent in those different kinds of different sort of self groupings of organizations. So let me see, there might be some comments in thank you, Renal. Yeah. CB asks, have you seen companies transforming to a digital orientation, but not quite getting there? Ooh, what are the strong mean reversion drivers that lead to failing? Oh, that's such an interesting question. Well, I don't want to talk about any particular company, and they certainly don't. People that's sort of when people don't quite make it, it's not necessary. They don't really sort of advertise that, broadly and say. Usually, when people succeed, that's when you get the case studies, right? But it's a excuse me. It is a great question. I think I have seen companies that have not gone as far or as fast as we had hoped when we interviewed them. And sometimes, especially if it's a large company, it's hard to sort of maintain momentum when there's other issues going on. Sometimes it's easier for a part of a company to change and to sort of sustain that new identity, even when the rest of the larger organization or other divisions are not. But that makes for a great research agenda. I'd love. Who is CB? It would be great to hear more from you offline, and perhaps talk more about this. But it's hard to change culture, and that's why we actually say start with the practices, because it's hard to sort of force people to think differently, right? But we say start with the practices, start to build these ways of working, because when people see the results of the practice, it's almost, there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance going on there, that, when I see, when I, that we see the results of these new ways of working, and that has the effect of changing people's minds, of shifting their values, right? To say it's better to be more open and work with other people across than to be sort of stuck in my silos and rule bound about who people at a certain level of the organization can contact directly, for example, right? So we recommend that starting with the practices, because the values can follow later, and it's also less challenging to individuals, to say, I'm not forcing you to change your mind yet. I'm not, but just try this out. Try out this new behavior. See how it feels, right? That's less threatening. And when people try out a new behavior without, feeling forced to commit to a whole new mindset, then that you kind of get the experience. You experience the outcome of that behavior that can then be a more positive influence on shifting values and attitudes. I see a question. Sorry, I'm just trying to pull it back up into. what is it? Does digital organization mean using latest technologies like AI, ML, cloud computing, IoTs, etc., or it means more real-time, digitally connected, agile approach? Yes and yes, right? Because who was this? This was Abhilash who asked. Certainly, I'm saying that you don't need to be doing AI and IoTs right away, but what's important is that you start to shift your operations to more digital modes, by meaning, you know, more automated and more digital data gathering in the process of activities, right? So that you're actually getting more data about your operations. That I would say is the sort of the starting point from a technology and process, business process point of view, is that you're starting to use digital tools and data in your operations more and more. And the fact of using those means that you're actually not just automating parts of what you do, but you're also informating what you do. The mere fact of using digital technologies, IT, to get stuff done means that you've got that digital record, right? And then you can analyze. You can look at that data and you can analyze what happened, what works, what doesn't work. Are we hitting our targets? And then you can start to ask that question more frequently. Are we hitting our targets, right? So you start to get to more this sort of real-time monitoring and adjustment. And when, the AI needs a lot of data. It's no good trying to do artificial intelligence or sort of machine learning without sufficient data, because otherwise you're just going to get sort of more spurious results, right? You might be training, you might be building algorithms that are biased because they're only trained on a limited data set. So, I think you really want to get the basics in place, but it's definitely part of it, right? And I think almost everybody's sort of along that journey to some degree. You're all using, enterprise resource planning systems and CRMs, and maybe you've sort of started to get more integrated supply chain management, and you've got information systems that are tracking data right from your upstream suppliers, maybe your suppliers, I don't know, but all of those information systems are part of the foundation for becoming digital. That's digitizing your operations. The IoTs, the sort of more sort of being able to monitor, maybe monitor equipment and have it adjust automatically, or be able to monitor your equipment in a customer's, or your product in a customer's environment. That will come if that's not in place already. But I do think, this focus on more real-time, digitally connected, but also, thinking about trying to change fast, trying to do things at a faster pace, right? Because the challenge right now is that because everything is so interconnected, things can, trends, consumer interests, maybe even your client needs, can shift very, very fast. And so if you're going to respond appropriately, you need to be able to make decisions quickly, act on them, get things out there. As I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be something that's a reasonable, that you can then engage with your customers and think more collaboratively. That's that value of openness. Think of your customers as part and parcel of your innovation efforts. Think about perhaps your competitors as part and parcel of how do we serve our customer base more effectively. I mean, if you're on a platform business course, you're probably already thinking like that. You're thinking about, if I'm as a platform, there are other producers who bring something different to this platform, and together we can provide something more valuable to, a more valuable, more complete service to our shared customer base. So, I think people who are thinking about platform businesses are already somewhat along on that openness value, that openness mindset, being ready to collaborate with perhaps non-traditional partners. Okay, let me just see. I think there was one more question. This might have come from someone on YouTube. Are there any critical paths for the early transitioning organizations when they want to change into digital culture organization while the employees are still in traditional mode? Oh, I'm trying to think. I did some research, more case-based research some years back. The experience of making this shift is it's sort of mentally disconcerting at the individual level, I think, and maybe even at the organizational level, because often, you might have the goal of trying to meet your customer needs in a very responsive, intimate way, sort of personalization stuff, but you don't necessarily have all the processes in place. You don't necessarily have all the tools in place that are able to do that easily, and so often it comes down to individual workers, individual employees, sort of being the hero in trying to fill in the gaps between what we really want to, the experience we really want to deliver to our customer and the capabilities of our current processes. And often I think if you think, you talk about your employees still in traditional mode, but I think it's often a matter of telling them a story about, who we are as a company and who are our customers. We exist because of our customers, right? If you don't have customers, you don't have anybody buying your product or your service. You don't have a business at some point, right? So, sort of, and I think employees, when they can see how their role, feed into that, feeding into what the customer wants and how you deliver to them, that can be really, really motivating, and it will help them across that really dissonant phase when you don't yet have all your systems integrated, and you maybe don't have your processes as streamlined as you want. You might be trying to pull data from different sources in order to answer a customer query or to deliver some information to them that they need. That connection to the customer can be very, very motivating. And so I would say that's one of the things that you really want to tell that story about how we as a company are integrally sort of connected to our customer, and help each person in their individual role figure out, what is my role and how does that play into, the experience that our customer gets, right? Let me see. Augustinus asks, tips and strategies of leading and managing digital culture values in the context of higher education in developing countries. Oh my, a lot of qualifiers there. I don't know specifically about, you might have to talk to me more about the context of higher education and, which specific developing countries, because I think there's certain, I don't want to sort of, label everybody in a very generic way, but I will just draw your attention to the fact that George and I are available to help you if you would like to, work with us on a, some more detailed analysis of your company, of its current culture. Essentially, you want to do a kind of gap analysis, right? I've told you what you should be trying to aim for. Sometimes it helps to know exactly where you are right now, to be able to have that analysis of, oh, this is if you're maybe at the top of your organization, you might, or somewhere in the top, you may think, you may have a different view of how things are. And when you get the perspectives of people elsewhere in the organization, you might get a much more rounded sense of, okay, what really is the culture in this organization? You can even analyze the culture in different sort of subgroups, if you like. That's possible. And then once you have that diagnosis, then it's then you have much more information about knowing where shall I push first, what levers can I adjust and get the biggest bang for my buck in terms of shifting how people think and act and feel, right? Because that's when it comes down to it, when people feel when what the organization is trying to do is consistent with their values, and then they're going to go move along with you, right? So I think this kind of diagnosis could really help in some forms. And so I encourage anybody who's been on this call to reach out to me if you would like to explore possibilities and around analyzing your company's organizational culture and talking more about becoming more digital. All right. I think I'm going to have to finish there. I see we're at time. I want to thank you very much for your questions. Very thoughtful, and I hope that this is valuable insight for you going forward. And I wish you all the best on the rest of your digital platforms course. You've got a great leader in Dimitris Karapis, great colleague of mine, and I hope to connect with you on LinkedIn at any rate. All the best. Thank you. Stay well. Bye-bye. Thank you.